Hello, everyone, and welcome to FaM Sports Varsity. I'm your host, Frank Langella, joined by my co-host, Marcelio Langella. And Mars, this is our team preview show for Section 1AA. Not too long ago, we did our Frank's Finest list, but we're a couple weeks away from football, and now we're going to dive into all the programs and the conversations with the coaches that I've had over these last, I would say, over a month now.
Yeah.
Talked to a bunch of coaches, not all the coaches. I understand that it's a busy time, but this is going to be our team preview. And Mars, before we get into the kind of the nuts and bolts of the show, welcome you to the show and welcome our audience to the show.
Yeah, man. I mean, this is it's getting the crunch time now.
Yes.
We're getting closer and closer to the season, and I can already feel the excitement. Right?
Absolutely.
And I can see that from all the different programs on social media. I can see from the kids on social media, and just between us. I mean, we're football's everything, man.
It is.
And just being back on the field, right? That's the big thing that we really gets our juices flowing.
Absolutely, and I do want to welcome the audience to tuning into the show. Again, you guys can follow us. If you want to follow us on Twitter, you can follow us at FamSportsVF. You can follow us on Instagram at FamSportsNYVF. And obviously, you're watching this on YouTube. So, give a like to the show, subscribe, share it with your friends who like Section 1 football. We would really appreciate all the support and the continued support that we've had. Again, those who don't know, this is our first ever team preview show where we're going to be talking a little bit about each program. This is for 1AA. And just to give a little bit of background, we've talked to a bunch of coaches. We're going to talk about projected returning starters. So when we talk about projected returning starters, we're going to talk about the kids that we should definitely keep an eye on that have impressed both the coaches and ourselves on this list. But the projected starters doesn't mean that we were given, we were told who the starters were going to be this season. These are just projected on who played last year, some of the conversations we had with coaches. Again, these are projected. So any kids who watch this don't think that all the starters have been solidified. That is not the case.
For sure. And on top of that, because of COVID and everything being very shortened, play by week will get you to be a starter. So play and practice will get you to be a starter.
Absolutely.
So that's a crucial thing. You mentioned that right in the very beginning, is that make sure that when you watch this, if your name wasn't mentioned, it doesn't mean that you're not a starter. This should be driving you to want to push even harder to become a bigger name known.
Absolutely. And just to discuss about COVID football. And this is our first show talking about it. I just want to kind of give a brief thing about COVID football, COVID time football, because this is very unusual. Normally, football's in the fall. You've had months of working out, camps, 7-on-7s. That's not the case this year. And I think we're going to see a trend, and we'll see this throughout the section. But just talking about 1AA, that I think the more successful teams, Mars, during this period are teams that have more returning starters, more veteran starters coming back, especially at the quarterback and offensive line position, because it's really difficult in shortened practices to get that continuity, not just at the quarterback spot, but on both the offensive and defensive lines, Mars, because they have to have synergy together as well. So I think teams that you see have more of those, you're going to see are more successful, especially in the beginning of the year, and veteran coaches, right? Teams that have veteran coaches and veteran coaching staffs, the kids will know their scheme. The coaches know the program, know the kids, right? New coaches are going to be really behind the eight ball because they have to implement their program in such a weird, condensed sporting event that you didn't get a lot of practice time with, that you had to implement your stuff through Zoom and all that. So I think new coaching staffs are going to be a little bit behind the eight ball. Mm-hmm. And finally, Mars, teams that have depth. Right? With this condensed sports, you're going right from winter to fall to spring. This is going to be taxing on young players' bodies, and you could see, unfortunately, some injuries, especially with the reduced practice time. We say iron sharpens iron, but you're not going to get that kind of practice that you would normally get. And teams that have a little more depth, I think, will be more successful this season compared to ones that don't.
Yeah, and one thing I'll definitely add a few things here. Firstly, I think that younger players will definitely get more experience as the season progresses.
Absolutely.
So you might see a team that's very young in the beginning that will get better and better as the season progresses because they start to get more experience. And on top of that, I've talked with a lot of coaches I know, and one thing we kind of pulled together was that normally a lot of times in high school, when a kid might progress, even get bigger, they might hit puberty, get more taller as from the fall season to the spring season. Now you're playing spring ball, so those seniors that might have hit a growth spurt,
or
right,
even,
or even older. Big, or even older. So it's almost like a freshman year college senior, freshman year of college player starting on your high school unit, and like a junior might be progressing to a senior body. So you might get even more competitiveness going in a lot of these teams, Absolutely. And that's something that's important to kind of see.
That's a great point. But Mars, we have a lot to talk about in 1AA. I know this is going to be a little bit of a long show, but just looking at 1AA, obviously in 2019 was the last time we played. Rochelle beat Carmel in the Section 1AA championship, and Section 1AA is not the same as it was back in 2019. I mean, you have Spring Valley, Mahopac, Mount Vernon, Ossining, Ramapo all out, right? They've either moved to another division or moved to independent. And Fox Lane comes in, and they haven't been in 1AA since 2017, so it's been quite a few years.
Yep.
So 1AA is different, and now we're hearing the divisions that were made in 2020 last year are not the same ones that we might see at the start of the season. And this is not official, but the word is the two divisions are separated in this way: New Rochelle, Portchester, White Plains, Scarsdale, Mamaroneck, Yonkers Force, and Yonkers Brave. And on the other side, John Jay, Carmel, Arlington, North Rockland, RC Ketchum, Suffern, and Fox Lane. So those are the two divisions. I will tell you this one, that John Jay division feels like a gauntlet. And we'll dive into those teams, Mars. But let's start it off the bat. I just want to make sure everyone understands. We're going to start on our team previews with the two championship teams from 2019, the two teams that played in the championship. And then everyone after that is random, right? So they're not indicative of what we think of them as a team or where we think they're going to play.
There's no rankings or anything. No. It's just purely randomness.
Yes. And normally I would like to give a season preview, record previews, stuff like that, bold predictions. But because the official schedule is not out, I am not going to do that because I don't think it's going to be very valuable until we get a full schedule about what's going on. And that'll probably be on Twitter. So that's why definitely give us a follow. But Mars, let's jump right into it. Let's go with the champions, New Rochelle Huguenots. And obviously the big news is Coach Dorenzo leaving.
Yep.
Right? So Coach Dorenzo leaves. Coach Ray Rett is in. He was a longtime JV coach. And, he's bringing back guys like Coach Foster and stuff like that. I've been in New Rochelle for a long time. They've been part of New Rochelle playing, coaching there since my father and Coach Dorenzo coached them. Right? Our father was an assistant coach there. So, these guys are New Rochelle born and bred.
Yep.
So, I don't think there's going to be a huge change in what went on. But losing Coach Dorenzo is obviously a big loss. He was probably arguably, in my opinion, the best coach in Section 1AA. And when you lose him, New Rochelle proved that they can still go on a run that they did last year. 2 years ago in 2019, going 13-0, winning the section and state championship. But it's a big loss. And so how are they going to react with a new coach coming in that isn't Coach Dorenzo? And that's going to be the real interesting thing, Mars. But they have 14 section titles. They haven't won less than 8 games since 2013. All right, so they had a bunch of good players. Obviously, we saw they won the states. And they lose them to graduation. 4 out of the 11 starters projected to be coming back. On the defensive side, about 3 or 4. On the offensive line, only 1 out of the 5. Right? So, and we're going to see what happens at the quarterback spot. Right? Last year was Tyreek Benjamin, and we'll talk about another name that is, has impressed me with the offseason work at the quarterback spot. But New Rochelle's a factory, Mars. I mean, they just keep peddling out good talent, good football players. So even though they lose a bunch of key cogs from last year's team, it kind of feels like they just filter it in again.
Yeah.
Now, the names that have really impressed me, and definitely to keep an eye on this year, let's start with the Frank's finest guys. Nate King, the offensive lineman, defensive lineman. The kid is an anchor on the O-line. I'm interested to see if he, gets a bigger role on the defensive side this year. But this kid, obviously a college offensive lineman, anchoring the offensive line, the one returner starter. And then Colin Jennings, the senior. Is he going to be the lead back? That's kind of the question for me. And because as a Frank's finest, he was our Frank's finest running back. He has a good mixture of speed and strength. But he's also a good two-way player. He's a rangy safety who will hit you and he'll make plays on the ball. Gary Phillips, another Frank finest, versatile defensive back. He was a Frank's finest on the defensive side. Offensively, he's that slot back. He'll get jet sweeps. They'll throw it to him. This kid's another dynamic player. Caden Smith, final Frank's finest at the defensive back spot. Box safety, he could play high safety. This kid has a nose for the football, Mars. And then some of the names we didn't get to on the Frank's finest that I think this next young man I think is going to have a breakout season. And that's Isaiah Massey, Mars, the senior. Isaiah Massey, there's 2 of them. Isaiah Massey, the senior, he's played that outside linebacker role at 6'1", 215 pounds. This kid can rush the passer, and he can also play the run really well. I think he's going to have a breakout season. Another one, Jaheim Gregory, the wide receiver and outside linebacker. This kid at 6'3", he's a long, versatile defender. He was actually playing some safety last year, and I think they moved him to the linebacker spot. But this kid's going to be a big target in the passing game as well. And he's going to be really important. If we talk about all the running backs, what happens at the receiver spot is going to be extremely important. A couple guys that are not well known right now, and I'm interested to see how they come onto the scene, Mars. Jaden Pereira. I know you see all the videos, you see him working hard at the quarterback position. I'm interested to see what Rochelle does at the quarterback spot, because if the quarterback spot is elevated, it brings a whole new dynamic for Rochelle, Mars. And finally, Solomon Darty. This kid, 5'8", 190 pounds. This kid's a 4'4", 40. I mean, he squats about 500 pounds. This kid's at the running back spot. You're starting to see that running back by committee. And there is actually one more name, excuse me. Jason Izarari. This kid's another interesting kid. And this kid at 5'10", 190 pounds on offense, he is a downhill running back. And this kid's a really pretty good complementary piece to a kid like Colin Jennings. And I also, he's going to be a two-way contributor this year. And this kid's another hardworking football player. Mm-hmm. The list I just gave you, there's a lot of talent coming back.
Yeah.
And, this could be one of the, in my opinion, they're going to be the top defense in 1AA, in my opinion, based on the talent that they have back. Arguably the best secondary in Section 1. That's the kind of secondary I think they can bring back this year. Again, they're the big dogs in the house, Mars. Mm-hmm. Can a team knock them off? They're going to bring out some talented football players. Again, interested to see how they do the running back position, because you have multiple mouths to feed, but Rochelle's figured that out before.
Yeah.
Right? There's going to be multiple mouths to feed at the running back spot, how they do that, and the quarterback position is going to be really interesting to me, along with the offensive and defensive line. But they always bring out offensive and defensive line. Mm-hmm. To me, the question is how to do quarterback, how they filter in the running backs, Mars. Really talented. I think they're going to be the best defense in 1AA. And that's not, I don't think that's a diss on anybody, but Rochelle's bringing back a bunch of talent.
Yeah, man. I mean, look, you kind of took a lot of my spots here, but the fact is I'm going to key in on the Frank's Finest list. I mean, Nate King, Colin Jennings, Gary Phillips, Caden Smith, they're all very talented players. There's a reason why they're on the list for. Yeah. And I think that Rochelle is going to ride deeply on these veteran presence. The guys who are returning as being the stars and even just being a depth talent, they're going to utilize them to the fullest degree. Now, Granted, and I know you mentioned, I mean, they don't really have a lot of returning starters, but these are all cogs into this machine that is Rochelle, and they consistently every year always bring out the best of AA, and they do it because of, as you mentioned, this pipeline of great talent coming in and also just great coaching. Yes. I think the fact that this coaching staff has been together for a very long time, you mentioned, our father's been a part, and the same general coaches have been around for a long time for the most part, not everybody, but it's for the most part. And the fact is because the system that they rack out is a very successful one. Yes. And I think when I look at my take, I think the offense is going to ride on the offensive line and on the running game. And not bashing any quarterback play or anything. I just think that that's their strongest part of Rochelle's offense, is having two solid running backs, obviously led by Colin Jennings.
It could be like 3 or 4.
Yeah, I think just Colin Jennings is just such a great talent at running back, and I think that you have a bunch of running backs alongside him that are very talented too. An offensive line that's just led by Nate King, who's a monster. And then on top of that, their defense, as you mentioned, possibly the best in AA, definitely most likely the best secondary in AA. Yes. That's just a deadly combination. Yeah. I mean, Rochelle always is a great defense. For the most part, I've never really seen them be a bad defense, but when you're a great defense and you have a good running game, you can control the tempo, especially in high school sports.
Yes. Moving on to the team they played in the Section 1 championship in 2019, Mars, the Carmel Rams. And obviously the big discussion was how are they going to replace Coach Todd Kay? But they didn't have to. And Todd Kay is back, which is good to hear. He's an important part of Section 1. And I'm not going to get into the politics because that's this is a football show.
Yeah, it's not politics.
So let's just move on. And that Coach K is back, and he's one of the better coaches, arguably with Dorenzo being out. He's up there with the best coach in Section 1AA, and his staff has done a tremendous job over the years. In 2019, obviously they went 8-2. They lost to Rochelle, but, Mars, 2019 was the most wins they've had at Carmel since 2004 when they had 8 wins. And this is the second smallest school in 1AA. I mean, Carmel's always been on the smaller end in 1AA and yet have been extremely competitive. They have 6 or more wins in 5 straight years. That hasn't happened since before 2004. So this is obviously the coaching staff has done a great job and the kids have done a great job, but Carmel's been always competitive. And when I spoke to Coach K, offensively they run a multiple offense, and they'll try to beat you multiple ways. Mars, if they want to beat you spread, they'll go into spread. If they want to beat you running downhill, going heavy sets, they can do that as well. They like to implement that because Coach says they want to give more kids opportunities. And they want to give a defense multiple looks that they have to. And we know in playing Carmel for a long time, Mars, you have to practice all those formations that they bring out, and it's taxing on a defense. On the other side of the ball, they kind of bring that similar mindset to the defensive side of the ball, and they come out of base 4-2-5. They'll go to 3-3. They'll even show a 5-man front if you're a run heavy team. They're multiple defense, but they like to keep it simple, right? They like to keep it simple, but give an offense multiple looks. And that's an interesting dynamic that Coach brought up. And for the goals, when I spoke to Coach Todd K, they're not big into goal setting, but they have a message that they have for their kids. And that, Mars, is do your best each day as a player and have stats, and the rest will take care of itself. So as long as you give top effort, the rest will take care of itself. Obviously, they want to win, and they're competitive at that. But that's kind of the mindset. And this team last year was a senior-heavy team. I mean, they have no offensive starters returning, no defensive starters returning, quarterback leaving. Offensive line is going to be completely new. They had some kids, obviously, that rotated in during this championship run. But a lot of senior starters are not going to be there. And this is going to be an extremely young team. Coach K said this is the youngest team he's ever coached. And it's not just juniors up, right? So even the seniors that are coming, they don't have a lot of experience. And so this is going to be an extremely young team, Mars. Kind of what is your take before I dive into the players that definitely intrigued me?
Well, the fact is, when I made that statement about how teams will get better as season progresses, I was really targeting Carmel in my first take there. And the reason why is because, as you mentioned, a lot of these players were rotating in that championship run they had. That doesn't mean they have no experience at all. It just means they have less experience than all the starters that were constantly always there. But I think that as the season progresses for Carmel, they're going to get a lot more experience and they'll get better as weeks go on. But the important thing that you mentioned is that Coach K is a great coach. And I know we've played against his teams for a long time, and they were always competitive. And even more recently, they've always been a tough matchup for teams. And I think the same thing you could be saying about this year is that he'll get his guys ready to play. It's just how big is his playbook going to be in the beginning of the season, and how much is he willing to throw the kitchen sink at him? Is it going to be a cup? Is it going to be a fork and a knife? What's it going to be? And I know Todd K is a competitor, and I know that he'll definitely throw more than just one knife at a guy.
And just taking at the players, the biggest thing that intrigues me is the quarterback position, right? The quarterback open competition between Kevin Dahl and Jake Storn, the junior and the sophomore, is going to be very intriguing to me. And both really young guys. Obviously, in COVID time, it's hard to develop a quarterback because a lot of it's good virtual right now. You're not really on the field throwing. You're not on the field running plays. So I'm very intrigued by the quarterback battle. But a couple names, they have a couple seniors that had some rotational experience that are going to have to lead this team. Joe Risley, the tight end, and what they call the rover back. Ryan McDonald, who I think is moving to wide receiver, defensive back. Max Richardson. These are guys that are going to have to lead this team. But I think there are a few names, Mars, of underclassmen that are really going to explode this year, have that potential. And it starts with TJ Fusco, the junior tight end and defensive end. This kid's 6'4", 215 pounds, really nice-sized kid. Was on the varsity as a sophomore his junior campaign. This is a kid that you might want to keep an eye on. And another kid that really intrigues me, Josh Massey, the junior. He was a running back, safety, linebacker. This kid's not tall, but he shows some really nice athleticism and also has some good thickness to him. Again, he's like about 5'9", but 190 pounds. This kid, is he going to be the lead back? Is he going to be the guy who takes that mantle? Where Carmel's had a few really good backs over the years. Is he going to be that next guy? A couple other names to keep in mind, Mars. Rick Rosenfort, running back and safety, the junior. And up front, you're going to have Jack Kane. The offensive line, like I mentioned, completely new. Who takes that mantle? Who is the leader on the offensive line? That's a couple of names. And then finally, to round it off, Andrew Fiore, wide receiver DB. Scotty Danzin. And, my guy at the kicker spot, Nick Sedano, the junior. So you see a lot of junior names, right? Young football team. By the end of the season, these might become household names for Carmel. At the start of the year, we have no idea who they are, what kind of players are. But by the end of the season, this could be a really talented are a team that definitely grows and is expecting big things.
Hey, listen, the big name Nick Sedano, I mean, you got to give him most props here. We see him acing some shots here all over social media. And like, listen, the big thing about Carmel, as you mentioned already, is that experience is going to be growing over the season. And I expect that that's going to happen naturally with these players. And, we don't have the official schedules yet. We don't know who they're playing first, who they're playing last. But I do know that teams would probably look down on Carmel because they have such a young squad. But I wouldn't look down on them. Yeah. Being a scrappy unit like Carmel is, being a small town that always competes, is a dangerous thing.
Yes. Moving on, Mars. John Jay East Fishkill is our next one by Coach O'Hare, coached by Coach O'Hare. And, in 2019, they went 6-3. They lost to Rochelle in the quarterfinals. And John Jay East Fishkill is one of the more prominent programs in 1AA. And I'm just going to take Rochelle out of it because everyone struggled against Rochelle. But since 2015, John Jay East Fishkill is 13-6 versus Arlington, Carmel, Scarsdale, North Rockland, White Plains. These are prominent teams still in 1AA. They're 13-6 against them since 2015. That just shows you they play really well against the top competition in this class. They've also had 7 straight years of 6 or more wins. I just said Carmel had 6 or more wins 5 straight years. John Jay's done it 7 straight years. I mean, they're a very prominent program. Kids do a great job. Coaching staff does a really great job. And they're obviously a bigger school. But offensively, they're expecting about 6 starters back, Mars. They're bringing back the quarterback. 2 out of the 5 offensive linemen. Both guards are coming back. Defensively, about 5 starters. Right, so they are bringing a good chunk of players back that were prominent on that team. And when I spoke to Coach offensively, they have to replace Luke Mahan and Blanchard, which are 2 big pieces they have to. But he wants to be more consistent in the run game. And when I watched John Jay, they were a passing team last year. And it's a little unusual for John Jay. You think of John Jay as a run-first team. And they pass the ball a lot. It's because they have a talented quarterback and talented weapons. And Coach talked about he wanted more consistency in the run game, which intrigued me. And defensively, he wants to work on the depth. And we talked about depth being really important. Mm-hmm. Coach has reiterated that that's what they want to work on. But some of the kids to keep an eye on, Mars, Danny Beal, he was our Frank's finest, athletic, strong-arm kid. We talked about him quite a bit. He's going to be a huge role in this team. Mason Payton, another Frank's finest at the defensive back spot. But at wide receiver, the junior is going to have a big role this year. So he's going to be an important two-way player. And at 6'3", he's got good length, good size. Another underrated player, Liam Ryan, Mars. He's a really reliable target on the offensive side at wide receiver spot. He's just productive on both sides of the ball. Not a big-name guy, but he makes some big-time plays, and he definitely impresses me, Mars. Looking at the offensive line, got to bring up both guards, right? Steven Mueller, not the biggest guy, but a guy that's productive at the offensive line spot, uses his athleticism well, and he shows his strength. Cameron Kohowitz, the senior. This kid is the anchor. At 6'2", about 270 pounds, Mars. He is that anchor at the offensive line spot. He's the guy that moves bodies with his strength. This is that East Fishkill type lineman, right? Big-bodied kid. But there's another offensive lineman that I do want to hit. Stephen Morrow, the senior. 6'4", 260 pounds. East Fishkill always used to produce big tackles, right? And this seems to be that kid who got to step in. They got to replace a kid like Griggs, right? Does Stephen Morrow, is he that guy? And next big question to me, when we mentioned the wide receivers, the big question to me is the running back spot, because East Fishkill always used to produce, really good running backs. And so the first one I want to bring up, Patrick Holtz, and this kid was a transfer from Lourdes. This kid at 5'8", 175 pounds. He is a really, really good safety. I mean, East Fishkill, I mentioned Mason Payton, Liam Ryan, Patrick Holtz, and the final one I'm about to bring up. You're talking about a defensive back crew that is one of the best. I mean, they have really good depth at the defensive back spot to compete with a team that I talked earlier about, Rochelle. I think Rochelle's a little bit better, but this defensive back group for John Jay is going to be pretty darn good, and that definitely helps with the addition of Patrick Holtz, who is a really good rangy safety that's productive in both the run and pass game. So this was a big addition to the program. And the last one, but before I get to the next player, offensively, how does he become the next premier back? Because he did play some running back at Lourdes. I'm interested to see what he does on the offensive end. And finally, Jordan Crochet, right? This another senior. This kid, I think he's a real solid shifty runner. He showed some. I saw some flashes last year, and at 5'8", 175 pounds, not the biggest guy, but who takes that running back role, Mars? That's going to be the big question. The next team I do want to go into, Mars, is Arlington. Right, the Arlington Admirals by Coach Morano, and in 2019 they were 5-4. They lost to Rochelle in the quarters. I'm sorry, John Jay lost to Rochelle in the semis. I think I said quarters by accident, but Arlington lost to Rochelle in the quarters. All right, and they were 5-4 in 2019, and they've had they've won 7 or more wins 3 out of the last 4 years. Okay, before that time, from 2004 to 2015, they only had 7 wins 2 times. So you could say Arlington really feels like they've built up something to the point where they are now a team that you have to reckon with every year. Okay, and I know 5-4 wasn't the greatest, but 4 straight years with a winning record hasn't happened since 2008 to I believe it was 2011. Okay, so 4 straight years of a winning record hasn't happened since 2008 to 2011. It's a pretty darn good job that they do right there. Offensively, now this is a team that's going to bring back a bunch of players. So they were 5-4, had a pretty young team. Offensively, they're expecting 9 of the 11 starters back, Mars. Defensively, 8 of the 11. Now they do have to replace the quarterback, which is going to be big. But what I think is huge, 4 out of the 5 offensive linemen are returning. And that's big. That's big in a league like this. To bring back a majority of your offensive line is huge. And when I spoke to Coach about what he wants to improve on offensively, they want to be more efficient in the pass game. Okay, they were a run-heavy team, obviously, and for good reason. We'll get into why. Mm-hmm. But they want to be more efficient in the passing game. Defensively, they want to improve the pass rush. They want to get to the other team's quarterback. Sometimes quarterbacks had too much time, and they were making big plays in the passing game. And so that's definitely important. Now, when I look at this team, the players, Richie Finn has to be the number one. I think he's their best player on both sides of the ball. He's a hard-nosed running back. Love him at the linebacker spot. And he was one of Frank's finest at the linebacker spot. I love his ability to read offenses, to attack the line of scrimmage. This kid is their best two-way player, and he's one hard worker as well. Coach raves about him. And then we go into the offensive line because that's where the strength is going to be for this team, Mars. Starts with Tommy Gibson, right? Another Frank's finest athletic offensive line that shows some power. Isaiah Weathers, another one, junior. Okay, so he was a sophomore last year at 6'2", 248, strong, move his feet. I'm expecting a jump from this kid from the sophomore to junior year. And then Jake Pasqualello, I might have butchered his name, but at 6'5", 230, this is another big, long offensive lineman, Mars. And these are some of the names on the offensive side that are really going to, really be the strength of this team. And finally, another running back before we go into more players, Xavier Grant. This kid at 5'9", 170 pounds, really good outside runner, really good off-tackle runner. I think this is another good compliment to Richie Finn. So, I know Coach talks about improving in the passing game, but he has a good mixture of linemen returning with strength and 2 solid running backs. They could still rely on the running game, and they could ride that running game to a successful season. But going to the passing game, it's going to start with quarterback Joey Fortunato. And this kid, he's going to play at Utica College at the quarterback spot. He's going to be an important player to see how he elevates this Arlington offense because I think they'll have a really good running game and they'll have a good offensive line. How are they going to do in the passing game? Him combined with guys like Ian Griffin, the junior wide receiver, Frankie Venzolata, another wide receiver. How does the passing game mold together? That's going to be really important. Finally, another fullback and linebacker, Mike Olivier. This kid was a talented linebacker. He made a bunch of plays for them. I'm interested to see his growth at the linebacker spot. They bring back both linebackers, multiple defensive linemen, 2 out of the 4 secondary. If there is one thing that's, might concern people, is the secondary is going to be young, right? We return 2 of the 4. But everybody else, they're going to bring back a bunch of talent. Arlington could be, this could be one of those years that Arlington, can make a run. Now, I don't know if there's going to be playoffs or anything like that, but this is a team that comes back that has a lot of returning players, and Arlington is a team you have to be worried about, Mars. Those last 2 teams I talked about, what do you want to talk about?
So, John Jay's Fishkill, I definitely want to focus in on. In my opinion, John Jay has become one of those programs, like the second in line after New Rochelle, that always racks out a good team, even when they lose a lot of players that were starters. And and this has been like this for a very long time. It's not just brand new. They've always had talent. They've always had size. And it's been consistently been successful for them. Now, granted, whether they are a throwing team or they're a running team, they've always been able to move the ball pretty easily, in my opinion. But I think that the offense is going to be focusing on Danny Beal quite a lot. I mean, he is the Frank's finest. He is a dominant quarterback, and in our opinion, probably the best quarterback in the section. In the class. Yeah. And I think that when it comes to, I know your questions were about weapons and things like that, but I think that John Jay is going to bring out those weapons. I think Danny Beal is going to.
I think they have weapons.
Yeah, I think it's the offensive line. Say that. I think it's more that because the question was how many weapons are they going to have? Who's going to be the most breakout star for them?
More the running back spot.
Yeah, the running back spot. But I think Beal is going to be relied on pretty heavily. Yeah. And I think that he's going to elevate the players around him. And the offensive line, I mean, when you look, the two guys you mentioned, Kahorwitz and Morrow, I mean, they're large individuals, right? You know, over 6 feet at least. And I think that they're going to contribute a lot on really allowing the run game to open up more. Yeah. And I think the other positions that they'll fill in will do exactly the same thing. I think John Jay is in a good spot with especially with their defense being as good as it is.
Yeah, and before I move on, Arlington did have a big addition to the coaching staff, and that's former Yorktown head coach Resigno. So I'm interested to see that dynamic too. He was obviously had a really successful time at Yorktown. But Mars, moving on to the next two teams before we separate into discussion, I want to talk about Portchester, right? And Coach Halstead, his first season, he was a coach from Blindbrook. And 2019, they went 5-4. And offensively, they're actually going to return about 7 of the 11 starters from last year. They lost a few skill guys. They lost the quarterback spot, but the offensive line is going to be their strength. Right? They returned 4 out of the 5 offensive linemen. Defensively, they're returning about 5 out of the 11. Coach says, they have a lot of speed on that side. So speed is not going to be the issue. Size might be, but speed is not going to be the issue. But when I talk to Coach on offense, they run that option offense, and they're really looking to spread it to run the ball. Okay, so they want to spread you out, run it. They run that option, which tells you what's important, Mars. You have to have a smart quarterback. Mm-hmm. Right, you run that option offense, you have to have a smart quarterback, fast decision-making, and you have to have speed. Defensively, he likes to adjust his scheme based on his personnel. Now, they have his speedy personnel. He wants to utilize that and have everybody flying to the football. And just talking about Coach about his goals for the team, he wants to make Portchester one of the top programs in the section. And he had a really nice motto that I want to share. Better people make better Rams. And those who don't know, it's Portchester Rams. But I really like that. And he has a motto for the coaches, too, that each coach has to have a personal relationship with 5 players. And I find that to be, I like that. I like that kind of mentality, to get the coaches to, invest in the players a little bit more than just on the football field. But it's not easy. 1AA is a tough class. And thinking about some of the players that have come back, got to start with Carlos Escobar, our Frank's finest on the defensive side of the ball. I think he's a really disruptive tackle, does a good job using his hands. He's got to be a big player on both sides of the ball, Mars. Chris Martinez, another senior. He was a guard moving to center. This kid's going to be another important player. The line on both sides of the ball is going to be big for Portchester. And finally, Clayberth Alvarado, the senior, at 6 foot, 215, offensive tackle, defensive lineman. You get the message, right? They're going to have to win up front for them to have a successful year this year. But a couple guys definitely to keep a name on. Jakeem Jordan, the running back and defensive back, really good kid. Another kid, Stephen Marte, their leading tackler. He has a really good nose for the football. He's that outside linebacker, defensive back. He's also going to play fullback. And another, I mentioned the quarterbacks, trying to replace them. A couple names to keep in mind. Danny Davis Jr. and Tony Empire. This is the battle. 3 quarterbacks, and Daniel Hins. Right, so you have 3 quarterbacks vying for that starting quarterback role. Coach is waiting to see who's going to come in and grab that position. Right, he's waiting to see who's going to separate themselves, but that is the competition right now. Really interested to see those quarterbacks battle it out. Finally, Colin Taylor, a young guy, sophomore, running back and defensive back. Every year, Mars, there's always a kid who comes onto the scene. Young player that comes onto the scene. That's something to keep an eye on when it comes to Portchester. And, again, it's going to be interesting to see the quarterback battle, but they're going to have to win up front. That's where the strength is for this team. They're going to use their speed on defense. They're not big, right, but they got to use their speed, and they got to win up front on both sides of the ball for Portchester Mars. Moving on to the next team before we go into discussion, let's talk about White Plains. And Coach Lindbergh, He's been there a few years now. 2019, they went 7-2. They lost to John Jay's Fishkill in the quarters, Mars. And this past season, 2019, was the most wins that they've had, and back-to-back winning seasons for the first time since 2010 and 2011. So it's been a few years. This has been a very good last 2 years for this program, definitely stepping in the right direction. They're going to be young this year, right? Offensively, they do return 5 starters, but they're missing their quarterback. 4 out of the 5 offensive linemen aren't returning. Defensively, they're returning about 5 out of the 11 starters, Mars. And when I spoke to Coach, offensively, they like to play fast. They like to spread the ball around. They're looking to score about 50 points a game, right? So they're looking to pile on you, right? And Coach talked about wanting to throw it a little bit more. So that's kind of what their mindset is offensively. Defensively, they'd like to keep it simple. They're not big, right? But they want to win with speed and preventing big plays. It's kind of a bend but don't break defense, right? But that's kind of where Coach is. And his goal is pretty simple. He wants to be a top 4 program in 1AA. Last 2 years have been stepping in the right direction. I'm interested to see a really young team, how this team reacts. But a couple of the names, Mars, before we go into discussion. Elijah Pierre, the junior, he was Frank's finest. I think he is their most explosive player. At wide receiver spot, defensive back spot. We know what he is as a wideout. We talked about it at Frank's finest. Another kid to keep an eye on, Chris McGuire, the running back and linebacker. He's kind of a jack-of-all-trades player for them. Right? He can do a little bit of everything. This kid, not the biggest kid, but really versatile. He lined up in multiple spots on offense, defense at the linebacker spot. He's got a nose for the football. He's usually in on all the tackles. So this kid is going to be an important cog for that team. Another team that's going through a quarterback battle. For me, Jay Bondi, the junior JV kid, and Spencer Engler, quarterback and defensive back. If he doesn't play at the quarterback, he's going to play in the secondary. He might play both ways. But that's a quarterback battle, and it's going to be interesting. In this offense, you need good quarterback play, especially if coach wants to throw it more. A couple other names, running back Mason Long, the junior, wide receiver Danny LaSalle. These are kids to keep an eye on. And the one returning offensive lineman, Jaden Molina at the center spot, not a big, tall guy, at 5'8", but 200 pounds, right? He's going to have to be the leader of that offensive line that is replacing a lot of kids. And this is going to be a young football team. It's another team that you talked about. Could you see growth as the season goes along? It's not going to be easy in the beginning, especially, have an inexperienced quarterback. But we're going to see what White Plains does. They've been building these last couple of years. What is this next step? Do we see the next step? Right? And that's what we're going to see. Mars, the two teams, what do you want to discuss?
I'm talking about White Plains. I really like how dynamic they can be, especially on the offensive side. I think they have a lot of athletes, and I know that they're going to be a young team that fill a lot of spots, but they're still going to be very dangerous. And I like Coach's mantra that we're going to score 50 points on you, and that's our goal every game. Because in high school it's very difficult to have that motor, and I like how White Plains has that.
Yes.
Defensively, they'll be okay. I think their speed is what's going to help them at least contain a lot of these high-powered offenses in AA. But their offense is going to be something to really watch out for. I mean, I really like Elijah Pierre. I mean, he's when we did our Frank's Finest show, probably one of the most dynamic player in this class, and I really like him a lot. I mean, but I wouldn't look down on any of these athletes that you mentioned. I really like some of them. I mean, but the big question is going to be quarterback. What are they going to do with quarterback? And in a pass-heavy offense and a really spread you out and do a bunch of different things, the quarterback position is going to be really crucial,
Yes.
and that's going to be the big question coming into the season.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving on to the next, Mars. Scarsdale. Let's go to Scarsdale Raiders. Coach Verbois has been there for a long time. In 2019, they were 5-4. They lost to Spring Valley in the quarters in the playoffs. You want to talk about consistent program, Mars? They've had an over 500 record 7 of the last 10 years, right? So it's just consistency. Scarsdale's not an easy out. Offensively, now this is all projected because I didn't get to speak to Coach Verbois. But what I've seen, 5 out of the 11 offensive starters, the quarterback is coming back. Offensive line-wise, I believe 2 out of the 5 are coming back. Defensively, about 6 out of the 11 starters, right? So they are bringing guys back who had a bunch of experience. When you look at this team, most of the starters coming back are skill guys, right? And they run that triple option offense. It's good to get your quarterback back. That's huge. They're going to have weapons on all 3 kind of phases of that triple option. So at the quarterback spot, the fullback spot, and that slot receiver, not the slot back and the receiver, wing back, whatever you want to call them, that athlete on the edge. They have that coming back. And, defensively, they are bringing out a good amount of starters, right? 6 out of 11 is pretty good. And we'll talk about a few of those players, Mars, starting with Julian Glantz, who I think is their best guy, the junior linebacker and fullback. Again, I think he's a really good linebacker, a raw linebacker, but I think he's really solid the way he attacks the line of scrimmage. I think he could be a really talented player. But at the fullback spot is going to be a big role, right? In that triple option, you need that fullback to be a bell cow. This kid could be it. You saw signs of it last year. I think he's going to grow. I think he's going to be better. And another kid, Ben Miller, the quarterback. This is going to be big. Man. He is the veteran of this offense. He's been there a few years now. I think this is his third year coming in as a quarterback. You need that smart decision maker when you run that offense. And this is going to be big for Scarsdale to have this kid coming back. Big year potentially for this kid. He's going to have this for this team to be successful. Another kid to keep in mind, and I call him an athlete because he played about 5 positions last year, and that's Noah Ebner-Borst. This kid's a senior, multi-sport athlete. He lined up in multiple spots. This is the X factor of the team, right? Because he is that big play kid. So you definitely want to see they're going to be optioning pitching him the ball, throwing it to him. This kid is the X factor on offense. On defense, at the secondary level, we'll see what he plays there, but he's going to have to be another important two-way player for this team. A couple of linemen to look at, Mars. Brendan Knopp, the senior, he's the anchor on the offensive line. And at defensive end, he was pretty solid. He does a pretty good job setting the edge, making plays on defense. One of the better sure tacklers on the edge. He's going to be an important two-way player. And Edward Eforo, the defensive tackle, I think he's going to be playing both ways. This kid's a really underrated disruptive player, and he wins with his speed. Again, not a tall guy at 5'9", Mars, but he wins with his first step. With his first step, he explodes out of his stance. He really beats slow-footed defensive linemen. This kid's a disruptive guy. And, again, another important player, someone to keep an eye on, Mars. Coming up now, let's talk about North Rockland. And Coach Lynch, in 2019, they went 7-3. They did not make the playoffs, but, back-to-back winning records for the first time since 2013, 2014. And, North Rockland back in the day was a, dominant program. And we know, but this was a really good step. Last 2 years, winning records. They haven't had 3 straight winning seasons since 2012 to 2014. Mm-hmm. So I feel like this is going to be an important year to reestablish North Rockland as that prominent program. And offensively, they lost a bunch of kids, right? They're only bringing back 3 out of the 11 starters. They did lose their quarterback, but they did get a transfer, and we'll talk about the quarterback position. On the offensive line, 2 out of the 5 are returning. So at least, they bring back some of the offensive linemen, but a lot of skill guys they got to replace, Mars. So it's going to be tough. On defense, 4 out of the 11 starters, but they are bringing back 3 of their linebackers, which is really important on the defensive end. Especially, I talk about quarterback being hard to develop. It's going to be hard to develop linebackers in this shortened season because you got to read offenses. Right? So when you bring back practically all your linebackers, that's an important thing for a defense. So that's big. But when I talk to Coach, offensively, they are a run-heavy team. Let's not mistake. We know what North Rockland is.
Yeah.
Anyone who knows North Rockland knows what they do. But he does want to mix it up more. He does want to spread it around a little more. He wants to trust the skill guys a little bit more. So I'm interested to see how they open up the passing game a little bit. And defensively, that's what they pride themselves on. North Rockland coach says it. If you study North Rockland, they pride themselves on defense. They're a bend but don't break defense. But they always want to be a stout defense. They had the 5th-ranked defense in 1AA last year, and I'm not expecting much different. That's what they've prided themselves on, and that's what Coach kind of reiterates. But looking at the players, it's got to start with Manny Mena, Morris, our Frank's finest, reliable two-way offensive lineman. Not the tallest guy, but again, really reliable, really productive. Tron Carswell, another Frank's finest linebacker. He plays tight end as well. He's going to be a huge, important player for them. Both sides of the ball at the linebacker spot, he's really got to set the tone for that defense. But the transfer is the one I want to talk about right now, the quarterback battle. Because they have 2 quarterbacks who Coach says they're both going to play. It's just who's going to play quarterback. Mm-hmm. Right? They're both going to play both ways. And that Mateo Rodriguez is the first one, the senior. Right? He's a transfer, good-sized kid, good thickness, dual-threat quarterback. And then the other one, Tommy Kresbeck. So we're going to see that quarterback battle, and then whoever wins, both of them are going to play. That's what Coach definitely reassured me. But I'm interested to see who wins that quarterback battle. Another kid to keep in mind, Marsh, Bush Etienne. Or Etienne, the senior. He made some plays at the running back spot, especially when Isaiah Battle went down. This kid made some plays. And this is a kid that's returning for them at the running back spot. He did also play some linebacker, so I'm interested. This is going to be an important two-way player because North Rockland, you need to have that running back who can be that downhill running back.
Yep.
Right? That's really important. And finally, one of the offensive linemen, we talked about Manny Mena. Let's talk about Jefferson Vargas, the junior. He was a sophomore last year at Mars at 6'3", 200 pounds. This kid was an impressive young football player. And I think he's going to grow. And I'm really intrigued to see his junior year because being at 6'3", that's some good size. Now, he's definitely got to put on some muscle, but he moved his feet pretty well for a young guy, and he showed some tenacity. And I'm interested to see this kid kind of grow and take that next step. So that's a kid to definitely keep an eye on. It could be a young player that breaks out, Mars. But let's talk about those two teams. Who do you want to discuss?
North Rockland is a very interesting team. They have always been a powerhouse. I mean, for a long time, their programs are always dominant. And you kind of mentioned the last time they were considered the top program in football was, I don't like bringing back my old days, but it was when I was in high school playing against North Rockland.
2013, 2014.
Yeah, those years were the years of North Rockland's dominance.
And obviously they had
even before that, they were dominant.
The most recent dominance.
More recent dominance, yes. But they've always been that run-heavy team. We're going to just run you over with a stout defense to stop you. And that's the same type of mantra I could see them playing in this season. Now, granted, the biggest X factor is going to be the quarterback position.
Yes.
Who is going to be the quarterback, and how well do they play, right? Yeah. If the quarterback plays really well, and whoever it is, I can see them change up.
It will really elevate their
it will definitely change up their offense. It won't be a run-heavy style. It will be a mix. And I think that would definitely benefit them because instead of playing against a defense that knows, they're just going to run the ball at us, like a bunch of times a game, they're going to say, well, let's see what they throw at us this time. Yeah. But the most important thing in my eyes is going to be the defense. And I think that if you have a good defense in Class AA, you can always compete. Yep. You always have a chance. And the fact that they're returning, as you mentioned, 3 of their linebackers?
All 3,
all 3 of their linebackers, that's a big deal. That's a big deal. And I think that, along with obviously Manny Mena being a very reliable two-way player, offensive line, defensive line, is going to be crucial for them to bring some success. And I think this is going to be one of those teams that will definitely get better as season progresses as well. They have some young, talented players here, and I think that they'll get better. I mean, definitely Jefferson Vargas is a guy very intriguing player. I really like the way he plays, and he was a young dude last year. He's still a young guy, and I think that he'll be a force to reckon with.
Next, I want to talk about RC Ketchum, Mars, by Coach Hogan, the team, the coach that coaches RCK. And 2019, they were 5-4. They lost to Carmel in the quarterfinals. But I tell you what, they took an important step, and the coaching staff did a good job. Back-to-back winning seasons for the first time since 2008, 2009. Mm-hmm. All right, so that was important to have 2 straight winning seasons. They haven't had 3 straight winning seasons since before 2004. So this is going to be a huge year, in my opinion, for this program. Do they take that next step? And offensively, they're returning about 7 of the 11 starters, 2 out of the 5 on the offensive line, but they're bringing back both their tight ends. And this is a double wing offense, so you do need those tight ends. So bringing them both back is really important. Defensively, 8 of the 11 starters. So they are bringing back some kids who had a lot of experience on last year's team. Offensively, I mentioned the double wing offense. When I spoke to Coach, he wants to create more explosive plays offensively, and that's kind of the big ticket. And they also want to reduce turnovers. They turn the ball over a little too much, and their offense was very grinded out on you, and they want to hit some more big plays. They want to create instant offense, as we like to call it. So that's definitely the motto that Coach is trying to emphasize this year. Defensively, they want to decrease the number of big plays that they had, especially in the passing game. Some teams hit some big pass plays on them, and that definitely, you saw that on tape. And Coach definitely wants to reassure that. He also wants to force more turnovers. The big message, a lot of coaches talk about winning the turnover battle. Stop turning the ball over and force turnovers. That's how you win football games, and that's definitely an emphasis that Coach told me. And he said it straight out. They want to take that next step in the program. They want to compete. I know it's hard to determine if there is going to be league title or anything like that. That's what they want to be at. That's what they consistently want to be at. And that's why I think this year, I talked about the back-to-back winning seasons, Mars. This is going to be an important year for RCK, that 3rd year of returning a bunch of players. I'm just going to tell you before I go to the players, RCK could be that surprise team. The only downfall is if the divisions are what they say they are, they're in a gauntlet. They are in an absolute gauntlet. But hey, iron sharpens iron, right? So you got to beat the good teams if you want to be a good program. And RCK has that opportunity. And I think they are going to be one of the surprise teams. They have that potential to be a surprise team this year. And it's because of the players that I'm about to mention. Matt Warner, start off the bat, right? Frank's finest, running back and defensive back. Really like him as a running back. Shifty, tough, hard-nosed runner. And on the offensive line, Chris Vanderland, offensive tackle, defensive lineman. He was another Frank's finest. He may focus on the offensive tackle a little bit more than on defense. I hope he's both ways, but if he still focuses on the offensive tackle spot, this is a kid who could potentially play at the college level on offense, especially potentially Division I. This kid's a mountain, right? We talked about this on the Frank's Finest list. But a couple other names, right? Gino Sagarino, fullback and linebacker, active linebacker. But on the offensive end, they run that double wing where the fullback is about 2 inches behind the quarterback, He's an extremely important part of this offense, okay? He's a downhill fullback. He's really like a pinball. He's at 5'10", 195 pounds. He just bounces off people. But on the linebacker side, really important. Another offensive lineman, Nathan DeGroat, senior, 6'2", 270 pounds, pretty decent-sized kid, okay? When you have Chris and then you have DeGroat, those are two big boys. It's going to be important for that wing T offense. You got to be able to move bodies. And that's what this kid needs to do, and I think he can. Billy Clark, another linebacker, one of the tight ends returning Mars. They're bringing back a bunch of linebackers, which is going to be really important for this defense. We talk about importance of linebackers, another active linebacker. But a kid who definitely intrigues me a lot, and I think this is a potential for a young player breaking out. John Capo. Okay, this kid played that strong safety outside linebacker role. He's going to play fullback, I believe, as well. This kid's athletic. He's a smooth athlete. And on the defensive side of the ball, he had a real nose for the football. He showed up a lot on tape, and he made some nice plays. He's one of the more sure tacklers. This is definitely a kid to keep an eye on. I think this kid, could be one of those breakout players this year. Another kid to keep an eye on, Oscar Gonzalez. He's a free safety, halfback, and kicker. And finally, Sean Camacho, another junior. He's really an athlete. All right, you can pin him. He can play multiple spots on offense. On the defensive back spot, he's another kid. Not tall, but again, another really solid player. These are the kind of names that we want to keep an eye on, Mars. And moving on to the next team. As I go through, Mamaroneck is the next one by Coach Vitti. Coached by Coach Vitti. And this in 2019 wasn't good, right? They went 1-8. It was a tough season. The year before, they went 7-2, right? So obviously they lost a lot of kids going into last year. 2019 was their toughest year win total wise since 2011. But they were young, right? They bring back 6 offensive starters on the offensive side, including their quarterback. 3 out of the 5 on the offensive line. And defensively, they bring back 7 of the 11, right? 3 out of the 4 secondary kids, 4 out of the 4 defensive linemen. So I talked about synergy on the offensive defensive line. You bring back 3 starters on offensive line, 4 starters on the defensive line. That's a pretty good starting point, right? That's a pretty good starting point up front. The big issue, they bring back none of their linebackers, right, on the defensive side. So how do you develop linebackers? That's going to be the big question for this team. But I spoke to Coach, they're a spread offense, those who don't know Mamaroneck. And Coach really emphasized with the lack of reps, how do you improve on the details, right? And that's a great point. With the lack of repetition, what does that do to your playbook? What does that do to your offensive scheme? They want to maximize their concepts, right? So you can definitely see the playbook probably shrinking because they want to maximize on the details, right? And that's going to be important. You win football games on details. Defensively, they're going to be a high-pressure defense. I mentioned the defensive line, Mars. They have 2 bookends, and we'll get into them, that are really disruptive. And they also have a veteran secondary. So they can create some havoc in the pass game. They can mix up some coverages because of the veteran, and they can bring pressure. That can cause some issues, in the passing game. The question should be stopping the run, right, with the young linebackers. But what Coach's big message to his team is, number one, they want to have fun, right? I mean, this is very unusual. There was a lot of talk of not even having a football season, so just to have fun and for the kids to play is important. And sometimes you got to take a step back and think about that. You know what I mean? Like, it is huge. This is important just to get football played is a big deal. And secondly, due to COVID, they're going to have to work on their depth. And we talked about depth.
Yeah, depth is going to be really crucial.
It is. But talk about the players really quick, Mars. Jack Benton, he is, I think, their most dynamic football player. Really good wide receiver. Also plays on the safety spot. Really good on both sides of the ball. I really like him. I think he's their best player. But talking about those bookends, Mars, Paul Fuller and Alex Verney. Paul Fuller, defensive end and running back. Alex Verney, defensive end and wide receiver. Alex Verney's going to be playing at the next level. These are both very disruptive guys, especially pass rushing. These guys can set the edge with their speed. They can make plays in pass rushing, and I think they're both strong enough and long enough to make plays in the run game. Talking about quarterback, they bring back their quarterback, Grant Malas. He's playing college lacrosse at Bucknell, right? So this is another good athlete, can throw the ball around. I really like this, got a strong arm. Definitely want to see consistency reading defenses, but this is another kid coming back. Brian Albert, the free safety, he comes back. Again, we'll talk about that secondary. Chris DeVito, 3-year slot wide receiver. He's probably going to be their most reliable target on the inside, obviously with Jack Benton on the outside. And a couple names at the linebacker spot, guys they're going to have to develop, Mars. Will Paneros, the junior. Jack Ramsey, the sophomore, young linebackers, right? How fast will they grow into that linebacker role is going to be extremely important. And a young offensive lineman, Henry Bennett, another sophomore. They Really like the way he's put the work in this offseason, Coach said. So that's another young player to keep an eye on, Mars. All right, which team you want to talk about?
So I'm going to talk about RCK. I really like the fact that they have so many returning players, and I think that's the most important thing about this team. And you kind of mentioned the fact that they are they're most likely to be a surprise team, and I agree with you completely. And the reason why, and I think that even if this was a regular season, they would be a surprise team anyway. But the fact that this is in COVID season, where you're going to have less time to practice, you're going to have a limited amount of off-season training. You have these kids that are all returning, and you mentioned the numbers here. I mean, 7 of the 11 offensively, 8 of the 11 defensively returning. A lot of these guys already know the system. They don't have to learn too much different things. And in my opinion, I think that gives them the biggest advantage of all these other teams we mentioned. But on top of that, they do have a lot of athletes. I like the fact of how Matt Warner plays. He's a very good two-way athlete. I think he is. I mean, he's a Frank's finest, and he is just going to be probably going to be the bell cow for this offensive game. But on top of that, they just have a lot of other good athletes all around him, and I really like the fact that this kind of sets them in a spot where a lot of teams might not look too highly on them because for a few years they were kind of stuck in that spot where they were kind of in a tough division playing against Carmel, John Jay's, Fishkill, Arlington, and those Titans were battling it out. And RCK was kind of right on the outside of the cusp, but I feel like they're climbing their way back into it.
Last 2 years, they're taking important.
And I could see them being one of those surprise teams that will definitely have a few upsets. And I really like this team going forward, and I'm expecting something big from them this year.
Yeah, I mean that's absolutely huge. Moving on, Mars. Let's go to Fox Lane, and this is the new addition to AA. They haven't been in AA since 2017. They were in A last year. They went 6-3. They lost to Rye in the quarters. 2019 was their most wins since 2009. And they haven't had back-to-back winning seasons since 2009, 2010. So this is another interesting year for Fox Lane. They go up to a big division at a small school in 1AA. But I tell you what, I like this team. I like the team that's coming back. I know they returned 5 of the 11 projected starters. They have to replace the quarterback, but 3 out of the 5 of the offensive line is projected to come back. Defensively, 6 out of the 11 starters. I think defense is going to be the best part of this team. I do. I think they had a good defense last year. They only gave up 17.4 points in A, which is not easy to do. They were a top 10 defense in A. I think they were 5th, actually. I think they were top 5 in A, and I think they've returned a bunch of key parts of that defense, and it starts with some of the guys that I'm going to name. Luca Friedman. Right, he was a Frank's finest at the linebacker spot. Really like this kid. I think he's a really good outside linebacker, really stout against the run, has the speed to set the edge. He just, again, disciplined too. Like we talked about cutbacks. He does a good job of staying in his lane, avoiding cutbacks. He's just a really active football player, and I think he's going to be the best defensive player on this team. Another guy to keep in mind, defensive tackle and offensive guard, Nino Prisco, right? Big body kid. He's hard to move. He's going to be an important cog in the middle of that defense to protect the linebackers. And he's going to have to set, he's going to have to hold his spot. He can't get pushed around. It's really important for a defense to not have the point of attack be moved. He's going to be important. Another guy on the defensive line spot, probably going to play offense as well. Griffin Zegres, the senior, he's another active defensive end. Again, they lost some good players on defense, but this kid's a kid that could step up and be another important defensive lineman. I think he's going to have to. On the offensive line side, and I'm interested to see if he plays some defense as well, Michael Lupino, he's the big boy of the offense. 6'4", 305 pounds, big offensive tackle who can move bodies. All right. The question is, how big of a role does he get? He's going to go 2 ways. Right. So big body kid, he's going to have to be the anchor on the offensive line. And the next big question I have on this team, not just at the quarterback spot, which we're going to see, but it's really the running back spot. They had a really good running back in Washington last year. Who takes that mantle? Right. And someone who could is Christian Horvat. Right. He's a well-rounded football player. He's a running back. He played defensive back last year. This kid is a well-rounded DB. I like the way he gets into good position. He attacks the football, not afraid of in the run game. But at the running back spot, can he be that next guy? That's going to be the question that I have. Or is someone going to be that next guy is really the big question in this offense. Another kid to keep in mind, cornerback and wide receiver Thomas Olsen. There's another kid that, another athlete, another kid that impressed you, showed good signs. See how he grows to the next level. And finally, to wrap it off, another linebacker to keep in mind because Fox Lane's had good linebackers the last 2 years. Max Lupino, the senior. I type popping the game against Harrison Marcy really showed out. But this kid's an active linebacker, not the fastest guy. But I tell you what, he's always around the football. And Fox Lane is another team. If they weren't in that gauntlet of a division, I think they'd get some more notoriety because this could be another surprise team, Mars. All right, let's talk about Suffern, Mars, the Mounties, coached by Coach Delaney. And this kid, the team went 7-2 in 2019, which is the most wins they've had since 2015. They haven't had back-to-back winning seasons since before 2004. And Mars, this is going to be a talented team coming back. 6 out of the 11 starters on offense. You do have to replace the quarterback, but 4 out of the 5 offensive linemen are returning. And on the defensive side, 7 out of the 11 starters coming back. And when I spoke to Coach, they're an air raid look on offense, but they're really a run first, pass second. And they're really run by their offensive coordinator, Dan Muller. But Coach talked about he wants to add more motion. He wants to add more jet sweeps. I'm interested to see how the passing game gets developed. But Coach raved about the offense and the job done by the offensive coordinator, but also the defense. They run a 4-3 defense, and by Dave DeGusso, the defensive coordinator, Coach really raved about his staff and how they developed those kids. And it's going to be important, again, in a COVID year to continue that success, Mars. It all starts with Cleveland Lubin. Right? When we talk about the players, Division I football player, running back and linebacker, defensive end, what do you want to call him? He's one of Frank's finest, just a dynamic football player. We've talked about it, and we don't have to go into it. But another underrated kid, an important cog to this team, is a running back and linebacker, John Chow. Okay, shifty runner. He shows good strength. At the linebacker spot, he's their most active linebacker. He attacks the line of scrimmage really well. He does a really good job taking good angles. He's going to be a huge cog, and they have that two-headed monster running the football. He doesn't get enough recognition. Cleveland is really talented. But this kid, John Chow, is an important part of this team, and he's going to have to be for them to be successful this year. But I really love the offensive line, Mars. I mean, we talk Eric Janua, John Krebs, Jared Newmeyer, James Lee. You're talking about returning 4 starters. 2 of them are Frank's finest. This is the strength of the team, is up front. And it's going to have to be again this year. But they're what really excites me. Another underrated kid, and Coach talked about him, Sam Joseph, Mars, the junior. Explosive kid, 5'6", 130 pounds. But he has that 4.5 speed, or maybe even below 4.5. He's the lightning rod of the team. And when you talk about jet sweeps, that's kind of the kid that you're thinking about. When he gets on the edge, this kid's a home run hitter, also a good returner. Dylan Yang is another kid, defensive end and tight end, Mars. He's a junior, 6'2", 205 pounds. He's kind of the other guy on the defense. Like, Clever, everyone focuses on him, and rightfully so. He's that other guy, and he's a guy who can make a lot of plays too when teams want to run away from Clever. I'm interested to see about him. And finally, the quarterback spot. Andre Risco, the junior, kid from the JV team coming, he has the best chance to win this job, and he's a baseball player. He plays baseball, plays basketball. He's not the same runner as those kids that you saw last year, a kid like Sullivan, but I tell you, they really like his arm talent, and this could be a new dynamic to that offense in the passing game, Mars. Let's talk about those two teams.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to pick with Suffern. I think Suffern, as you mentioned earlier, it has probably one of the most talented, best teams they've had in many, many years. And it all starts with Clev Lubin. And we already talked. We had a whole show on him. We had a whole breakdown on him. So I don't have to go too much to him. But just to make it quick, he's an animal on both sides of the ball, offensively and defensively. And the fact that you have him as running the ball, and then you have almost the entire offensive line returning, 4 out of 5 coming back, and they're all animals in their own right, gives the offense the advantage, right? So for Suffern, and I mean, the biggest X factor here for me is going to be the quarterback, and Andre Risco, it comes from the JV. Right, and I think that this is going to be, depending on how well he plays, it might even open up the offense even more, right? And that's going to be something that's going to be crucial for them. But defensively, I really like their front. I like Cleb Lubin. Obviously, he's going to be a monster at linebacker as well. Going to Army, he committed to go play at Army at linebacker. So I really like Suffern as a unit. And I mentioned RCK being a surprise team. I think Suffern is not really a surprise. It's a team that I already know that they will have a good season.
I think they're the second most talented team behind Rochelle. And I'll say that right now. That's how much faith I have on their players. And we'll see what happens, but they're definitely a talented team. Mars, let's round it off with the 2 Yonkers squads. Let's start with Yonkers Force, and this is coached by Coach Dan DiMatteo. It was a struggle. They went 2-7 in 2019. They were 5-4 in the year before. But I'll say this about the Yonkers team. This is going to take time. Okay, Yonkers has run into a big issue with losing kids to private schools or kids not coming out to play. This is going to take time for both Yonkers programs. So, wins come as things grow. So, again, this is going to be difficult. This team is going to be very young. I mean, they have 18 players who graduated. Offensively, they were pretty solid. They were 8th out of the 18 teams in AA last year. Offensively, they were pretty good. It's defensively that they struggled, right? They were 14th out of the 18 teams. But one player to really keep an eye on, Mars, Elijah Cordero. I think he's going to be their go-to guy. Running back, defensive back. I really like him as a corner. He's just really fluid hips, able to break on the ball, attack the football. This kid is the one that you definitely want to keep an eye on, Mars. And finally, let's go to Yonkers Brave. And listen, this is coached by Coach Giappa. Rochelle roots again. 2-7 last year. Again, we can keep talking about it. It's going to take some time. But they're expecting to return 4 out of 11 starters on offense and 4 out of 11 starters on defense. They have to replace the quarterback. A bunch of linemen have to come in, right? 1 out of 5 offensive linemen is expected to return. They run that triple option on offense. But Coach wants to run more no huddle. And not so much for tempo, Mars, but for efficiency. And people just think that when you run no huddle, it's all about, speeding up the game. It's not necessarily about that. It's about catching a defense off guard as well. It could be about tempo, obviously, but there's also another factor. Defensively, he wants to improve offenses. This is a New Rochelle guy, so defense is an important aspect of them. And he wants to improve all levels of it, especially with the basics. And he just wants to continue to build the culture. He wants to create accountability in a program. That's an important word. Accountability is a huge important word that a lot of people take for granted. But when you could build that, that's when you start to see winning, is when you build a culture of accountability. Yeah. That's what Coach wants to do, Mars. A couple of players. I got to start with Joshua Williams, Frank's finest, cornerback, running back. Again, we talked about him before at the Frank's finest thing, but he's going to be an important two-way player. Treat Williams, the senior, defensive lineman and offensive lineman. He's a disruptive defensive lineman. He's going to have to be a two-way important player. Brandon Kane, one of the top tacklers, is returning. Isaiah Bray, the defensive back and running back. Chris Needham, running back again. So they're going to have some speed at the running back spot. But the interesting thing is what they do with quarterback, and that's DJ Holmes, the junior. JV kid, good head on his shoulders, has a 4.6 40 speed, so he's got fast. When you run that option, Mars, really important to have that quarterback. And my biggest question is on the offensive defensive line, right? They have to replace a bunch of kids. You have to be able to have a solid offensive defensive line to compete in this big division. Yeah. And that's going to be important.
Yeah, I'm gonna continue that conversation with the Yonkers Brave. And the big thing for me is going to be DJ Holmes, right? And the triple option, as you mentioned, having a quick, fast quarterback in that system can be very deadly. But the question is going to be their offense and defensive line. What are you going to do with that? And who are you going to put in to replace a lot of these people that are leaving? And obviously Joshua Williams is going to be a great asset to this team and its growth. I'm expecting great things for him. But as you mentioned, starting the program the way they did is an accomplishment. But now you want to see success, and it's going to take time for that to happen. All you can do is applaud Coach for what he's doing, and I was trying to build that culture right in the program. And I think it's going to take some time, but it'll get there, right? It will get there, and I'm looking forward to see how these teams do.
Yeah. Woo! There we go. There is our team previews for 1AA. We want to thank everyone for tuning in. Again, check out the YouTube. We're also going to put the links for the time we talk to each team, each program. And again, we want to thank everyone for tuning into the show. Make sure you guys share it, give a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. You guys can follow us on Twitter, follow us on Instagram. Football's coming, man. And
man. Really it's almost here. It's like a holiday.
Absolutely. And we want to thank everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you all very soon.